Hello everyone, welcome back to one of our first pre-recorded videos. In today's video we'll be going back to our season preview series, finishing up the Pacific Division today with the Edmonton Oilers and the Los Angeles Kings. We'll look at how they did last year, how they did in the offseason, and how they're shaping up going into the 24-25 season. We'll get to all that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the Edmonton Hockey channel. Before we get into this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for all your support. We're new with all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. And don't forget to comment down in the comment section below so something else gets in this video. Now, we're going to do another season preview series video here today. We're talking about the Oilers and the LA Kings. So two interesting teams who had vastly different seasons. We're going to start with the Edmonton Oilers. Last year, it wasn't a pretty good season for them, had a horrible start to the year, but by the season's end, we're actually pretty good. Finished with a record of 49-27-6, 404 points, second in the Pacific Division, 5th in the Western Conference, and 9th in the NHL, so they had a pretty good season. Last year they had 294 goals for, which was 4th in the NHL, and 237 goals against, which was 10th in the NHL. So they had a top 5 offense, were really lethal offensively. Defensively, it was pretty good. It wasn't the best of the best, but it was a pretty decent defense, so pretty good stuff there for Edmonton. Their scoring leaders, they had 3 players over a point per game. McDavid led the team with 132 points. Another solid season for McDavid, although he wasn't one of the leaders like he was the past couple of seasons. Drysdale had 106 points, so not one of Drysdale's better seasons, but did have 100 points again. And then Evan Bouchard was a point per game, hitting 82 points, so he looked pretty good, and he was a fantastic defender for the Edmonton Oilers, so all had pretty good seasons. If you look at the goal scoring leaders, Zach Hyman was way and beyond the best goal scorer for the Oilers, scoring 54 goals, was fantastic in the regular season last year for Edmonton. Leon Draisaitl hit 41 goals, so another 40-goal season for Draisaitl, and Connor McDavid hit 32 goals, so interesting note there. But Hyman, Draisaitl, McDavid, the 3 leaders on the goal scoring side of things. The rookie scoring leader was James Hamblin. Hamblin had 2 goals, an assist for 3 points. Looked pretty good. Didn't have too many rookies in their lineup this past year, but Hamblin was a really good player who got into a couple of games, so interesting note there. If you look at this team, like we said, they finished the 2nd in the Pacific Division with 104 points, so that means they played 3rd place in the Pacific Division, which we'll talk about in a minute. The LA Kings, this year they wound up beating them in 5 after beating them in 6 and 7 the 2 years prior in the first round, so a simple series with a simple one over the LA Kings, and round 1 of the playoffs. In round 2, they wound up facing the Vancouver Canucks this year. It was a really hard-fought series. They were down by 1 game for the first 5 games of the series, but won Game 6 and Game 7 to win it in 7 over the Vancouver Canucks. Then in the Western Conference Final, they took on the Dallas Stars, found themselves down 2-1 in that series, but then won 3 straight to win that series 4-2 and advance to the first Stanley Cup Final they've had in quite some time. I think it's since like 06. And in the Stanley Cup Final, they got out to an early 3-0 series hole, wound up crawling their way back, forcing a Game 7 stunningly against the Florida Panthers, but then in Game 7 would lose 2-1 to the Florida Panthers and fall in the Stanley Cup Final in Game 7. So it was a really good series, really good hard fought series, but the Oilers do have their hearts broken in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final. So interesting to note there. The playoff scoring leaders were Connor McDavid, who had 42 points, including breaking the assist record for most assists in a playoff run. So interesting to note there. Bouchard was second on the team with 32 points. Meanwhile, the goal scoring leaders was Zach Hyman, who had 16 goals, and Leon Draisaitl, who had 10 goals. So Draisaitl and Hyman were really good scoring wise. McDavid and Bouchard put up the points, and this team was fantastic last year in the playoffs, just 1 game shy of the cup. So interesting note there. If you look at their additions and losses from this past year, they did not do a whole bunch on the additions side. If you look at their additions, they brought back a lot of guys who were on that team last year. So they brought back Am Henrique on a 2-year deal, Matthias Janmark on a 3-year deal, Corey Perry on a 1-year deal. Also brought back a couple of lower end players like Lavoie, Hamblin, Brown, Stetcher on top of Picard. So they bring in a couple of interesting players. Meanwhile, in free agency, they bring in Jeff Skinner on a 1-year deal, so he should be a solid top 6 addition. Victor Arvidsson on a 2-year deal, so another top 6 addition that should be really good there for them. They bring in Josh Brown on a 3-year deal, so he should be a solid defensive addition there for the Oilers. They bring in Connor Carrick, who should be a depth defenseman for them. And they bring in Colin Delia, who should be a solid 3rd stringer for them now that Jack Campbell's gone, because they bought him out. So interesting note there. They also extended Leon Draisaitl just a little while ago to an 8-year extension with AV of $14 million, making him the highest paid player next year. So that's a very fantastic pickup there for the Oilers to get Draisaitl extended. On top of that, if you look at their losses from this past year in free agency, they lost Warren Foegele to LA. They lost Sam Carrick to the New York Rangers, Carter Savoy and Adam Erne, who are both UFAs, Vinny Desharnais to Vancouver. They lost Marcus Niemelainen to UFA status. And then they also lost RFAs Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg via an offer sheet, as the St. Louis Blues offer sheeted them. So they lose Broberg to St. Louis and get a 2nd round pick in return via the offer sheet. sheet. They lose Holloway to St. Louis and get a third round pick in return. So interesting notes there, but they did lose quite a few guys, including a couple of key RFAs in the offer sheet mark. Meanwhile, if you look at the trades that they made this past year, they made a couple of interesting ones. They traded Ryan McLeod, who was a solid third line center, and Tyler Tullio, who was a decent prospect of theirs, to the Buffalo Sabres in exchange for top prospect Matthew Savoy, who eventually is going to be a solid top 9 forward. So that was a fantastic trade for them to get Matthew Savoy from the Buffalo Sabres. They also traded Xavier Bogo and Jake Chiasson, two former really good picks, a first rounder and I think a fourth rounder, to the Ottawa Senators in exchange for Robbie Harvinti and a 2025 fourth rounder, the Ottawa Senators. So that was a pretty good move, getting a fourth round pick and a solid former second round pick for a couple of other prospects but they didn't see a future with. They did also trade a 2025 fourth round pick, Ottawa's, to the Vancouver Canucks in exchange for Vasily Podkolzin. That was just after the Holloway offer sheet, so they needed someone to replace Holloway, so they get Podkolzin. Pretty good, decent trade there for the Oilers. I think Podkolzin could still be a solid third line forward. Then they offload Cody Ceci, moving him along with the 2025 third round pick to the San Jose Sharks in exchange for young defender Ty Emberson. Emberson looks like he's going to be a solid fifth defenseman there for the Oilers, not only right now, but could grow a little bit more too. Ceci and a third round pick go to San Jose, so they offloaded Ceci for a third round pick, so interesting move there. They then also trade future considerations to the Blues, who gave them Paul Fisher, who's a young prospect defenseman, and a 2028 third round pick, sort of like a compensation for them making sure the offer sheets goes through. So lots of interesting trades there from the Oilers. I think they won the Savoy trade. You could say they won or lost the Borgo trade. I think they won the Podkolzin deal. I think they probably didn't win the CC deal, but they got a pretty good player in return, and they also won the Fisher deal. So interesting note there. If you look at their top 3 picks from the Edmonton Oilers from this past year's draft, they had a first round pick, 32nd overall, and used it to select Sam O'Reilly as center prospect. Looks like eventually going to be a solid second, third line center there for the Oilers, so that's a pretty good pickup there. In the second round, 64th overall, they took goaltending prospect Emil Vinny, one of the top end goaltending prospects in this year's draft class. He should eventually be a solid starter, if not backup there for the Oilers. And in the 5th round, 160th overall, they had Connor Clanenberg, who's a left winger, eventually could be a solid bottom 6 forward. So all in all, not too bad for the Edmonton Oilers. Added some pretty good pieces here. I think they added a really good player in O'Reilly and Vinny, who should eventually be really good. They didn't have too much draft capital, but they really hit home with a lot of the ones that they did. So interesting note there. Now going over to my projected lineup for the Edmonton Oilers for this upcoming season. As it turned out, I couldn't have Jeff Skinner playing on top line with Connor McDavid and Zach Hyman. I have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins playing on line 2 with Leon Draisaitl and Vic Arvidsson. Line 3 is the same line 3 that they had in the playoffs, Janmark, Henrique, and Brown. And line 4 is Corey Perry, Derek Ryan, and Vasily Podkolzin. That's my current forward group for the Oilers. Defensively, I have Ekholm with Bouchard, I have Kulak with Nurse, and Emberson with Stetcher. I have Schooner being the starter, Picard being the backup, I have Lavoie and Brown being the spares, and Evander Kane's going to start the season on long-term injury reserve. So that should be a cap-compliant roster there for the Edmonton Oilers. So interesting to note there. If you look at my current projection for the Oilers for this upcoming season, now they improved a little bit in the offseason, made a lot of moves. I think they got maybe even a little bit better than they were last year. So I think they're going to improve a little bit, and with a couple of steps back teams like the Knights and the Canucks and the Kings have taken, I'm going to say the Oilers do win the Pacific Division again. I'm predicting them to have 112 points, 8 higher than last year, and to finish ahead of the Pacific Division by quite a bit, at least over 6 points. So I think the Oilers are going to have a fantastic season this year. They're going to be hungry to be a really good team again this year, and I think they're going to be able to make the playoffs and be a top-end team. So that's my opinion on the Oilers. I currently have them winning the Pacific Division with 112 points, 8 higher than they had last year, so interesting note there. If you look at 3 ways this team can improve to get better than last year, 1, consistent play from Skinner. As much as Skinner wasn't the huge contributor as to why they started so poorly, his bad play early on the season was a big contributor. So if he can start off well and have consistent play throughout the season, I think that could help the Oilers be a little bit better than they were last year. And strong play from the defense, we saw them have a couple of interesting defensive losses. So if they're able to add some more strong play from their defense, I think that could be something that could really help that team. And offensive adds fit in. If the guys like Victor Arvidsson can stay healthy, Skinner can replicate his performances from Buffalo, I think they could be some really good additions there for the Oilers. And if they can add some more pieces offensively and have it help them offensively, they could be the top team offensively in the league next year. So in my opinion, this team can improve to get better than last year is 1, consistent play from Stuart Skinner, 2, the defense plays a lot better than it did last year, and 3, the offensive adds like Skinner and Arvidsson and Podkolzin all fit in really well. So interesting to note there. Lastly, going over to my rating for this team for this past offseason. They did pretty good, made a couple of interesting trades, add some key pieces on the forward group. Did lose quite a bit of players like Foegele, Broberg, Holloway, Desharnais, also a couple of other guys like CC and Ryan McLeod. So they did lose quite a bit of guys, but they had Skinner, Arvidsson, Foegele, Emberson, Savoy, even though he probably won't play this year. So they added a lot of interesting pieces. So I'm going to give them a B rating. I think that's sort of warranted for what they did this year. I think they had a pretty good offseason. As much as I'm not the biggest of Oilers fans, I can see when a team had a really good offseason. This Oilers team definitely did have a pretty good offseason. So I think they did really well. They had some offer sheets put up against them, did the best they could in their situation, and I think they did pretty good. So that's my opinion on the Edmonton Oilers. Next, going over to the LA Kings. Now, for the LA Kings last year, they made the playoffs again, which was a really good thing for them. Finished with a record of 44-27-11 for 99 points, 3rd in the Pacific Division, 7th in the Western Conference, and 12th in the NHL. So they were a pretty good team last year. Had 256 goals for, which was tied for 16th in the NHL, so they're around an average team goal scoring wise. But defensively, they were phenomenal, putting up 215 goals against, which was 3rd in the NHL. They had a really good defensive system, maybe not the best goaltending, maybe not the best decor, but team defense was really good for them and had them in the top 3 in the goals against department, so they were fantastic defensively. If you look at their point scorers from last year, they had 3 players at 70 plus points. Adrian Kempe had 75 points, led the team in points. Kevin Fiala had 73 points, and Anze Kopitar had 70 points, so 3 really good point scorers there. Only one player had 30 goals, and it was none of those 3. Trevor Moore led the team with 31 goals, so he was a really good goal scorer last year. Fiala had 29 and Kempe had 28, so they were both close, but didn't hit the 30-plus plateau, so interesting note there. If you look at their rookie scoring leader, it was Alex Laferriere, who made the team last year and had 12 goals, 11 assists, and 23 points. Looked pretty good last year as a rookie, and I expect some more growth from him this upcoming season. So like we said, they made the playoffs. They were the 13th in the Pacific Division, which meant they faced the Edmonton Oilers, and as we just talked about, as much as they did face them the 2 previous years, the Oilers made quick work of them and won them 5 games. So it was a pretty bad series there for the Kings, and one that did lead to a couple of changes for their group. So interesting to note there. If you look at the playoff scoring leaders for the Kings, Kempe led a team with 5 points, and Byfield was second with 4 points. Both were pretty good players. And then Kempe led the team with 4 goals, and Doughty had 2 goals. So interesting to note there. Next, we'll go to the additions and losses the Kings had from this past offseason. If you look at their additions, they brought back Trevor Lewis, Quinton Byfield, Alex Turcotte, Akil Thomas, Tyler Madden, Samuel Fagemo, Jordan Spence, Eric Portillo, and Phoenix Copley. A lot of guys wound up being brought back by the LA Kings. If you look at their additions in free agency, they brought in Warren Foegele on a, I think, 2 or 3 year deal. So he should be able to help in the top 6, top 9. They also add some depth forwards in Jack Stanichka and Glenn Godden. They added a solid top 6 defenseman in Joel Edmundson, who I think should be a really good addition there on their defensive core. And they also had Caleb Jones, who can be a solid 7th, 8th defenseman for the Kings. And they also had Riley Walsh, who should be an AHLer for the Kings. So add some pretty good pieces there. If you look at their losses, they lose Vic Arvidsson to Edmonton. They lose TJ Tynan to Colorado. They lose Blake Lizotte to Pittsburgh. Mikhail Maltsev, who's a UFA. Matt Roy to Washington, and Cam Talbot to Detroit. So not a whole bunch of additions and losses there. Add a solid top 9 forward, 3rd, maybe 2nd pair of defensemen, and some depth additions. Lose Arvidsson, who's a solid top 6 forward. Lose Lizotte, who's a 4th line center. Lose Matt Roy, who's a solid top 4 defenseman, and lose Cam Talbot, who's a starting goaltender. So did lose a couple decent pieces, did add a couple decent pieces, but nothing too huge or significant there. They did make 3 trades that weren't pick-for-pick swaps. The first one was a big one. They traded Pierre-Luc Dubois, who did not fit in overly well last year after they acquired him from Winnipeg, and before his no movement clause kicked in, traded him to Washington in exchange for goaltender Darcy Kuemper. So that's the reason they didn't bring back Talbot. They now have Kuemper, so that's a pretty good deal there. They have Kemper's going to be coming off the books sooner, who's cheaper, and might be a better fit than Dubois was. So that's a pretty good move there. They didn't also trade Carl Grundstrom to the San Jose Sharks in exchange for Kyle Burrows. Burrows should be able to help us like a 7th, 8th defenseman. Grundstrom sort of getting downgraded after they continue to improve that forward group, so they were able to give him a fair start. And then they moved the 2024 4th round pick, 118th overall, and a 2025 2nd round pick, their own, to the Tampa Bay Lightning in exchange for Tanner Jeannot. Jeannot is entering the final year of his deal, but he's a really good bomb 6 forward who can definitely mix it up in the playoffs, so that could be a really good pickup there for the Kings too. So all in all, pretty good trades there. I mean, I think they lost the Grundstrom one, but they do get a pretty good defender. I don't think they won the Jeannot one, but I think he's also a really good player, and I think they by miles won the Kuemper trade. So interesting note there, but they definitely made some really good trades this offseason. I think their top 3 picks in this past year's draft, their first one was 1st round, 26 overall, took right winger Liam Greentree. Greentree is going to be a solid player there for the Kings. Eventually going to be a solid like 2nd, maybe 1st pair winger, so that could be a really good pickup there for LA. They also take Carter George, who's a goaltending prospect, taken in the 2nd round, 57th overall, should eventually be a backup, maybe even starter there for the Kings. So that's a pretty good pickup there. And the 6th round, 146 overall, they took Jared Woolley, who's a left shot defenseman. I think eventually could be a solid third pair defenseman there for the Kings. So interesting to note there. If I look at the two biggest questions entering training camp, it's one, can Thomas Turcotte or Clark make the team? Thomas and Turcotte have both been in the minors for quite some time now. Both had flashes at the NHL level last year. Can either of those two crack the top 12 there for the LA Kings? On top of that, Brendan Clark's been trying to crack the top 4 of the LA Kings on the defensive end for quite some time now. He's gotten stints at it. Hasn't been able to get a consistent NHL role. Can he get that consistent NHL role this year? That's going to be a big question. And 2, who's the team's backup? Now, the team traded for Kuemper, so they have Kuemper as a starter now, but they also have Riddick and Copley as the 2 and 3. So which goaltender winds up being the 2? Which goaltender winds up being the 3? I think Riddick probably has the inside track right now to be a backup, but we'll have to wait and see. So interesting note there, but the 2 biggest questions entering training camp is 1, can Thomas Turcotte or Clark make the team? And 2, who's the backup for this team? So interesting note there. If you go over to my current projected lineup for the LA Kings for a 24-25 season, at this point in time, I currently have Warren Foegele playing on top line with Anze Kopitar and Adrian Kempe. I have Byfield centering the second line with Kevin Fiala and Trevor Moore. I have Alex Laferriere playing on line 3 with Philip Deneau and Alex Turcotte. And I have Trevor Lewis, Akil Thomas, and Tanner Jeannot being the line 4. On the defensive end, I have Mikey Anderson and Drew Doughty being the 2 defensemen on the top pair. I have Gavrikov and Clark being on the second pair, and Spence and Edmundson being on the third pair. I have Kuemper being the starter and Rick being the backup. And I have Fagemo, England, and Burrows being the 3 spares. And I think that would be a cap compliant roster and a pretty good roster that for the LA Kings. So that's my current lineup prediction for the Kings for this upcoming season. If you go over to my prediction for the LA Kings for a 24-25 season, now I think they made some decent moves. I think they might have gone a slight bit worse, or maybe just same as last year. I don't think they really did a whole bunch to get a whole bunch better, but I definitely think they made some interesting moves. However, I do think there are a couple of teams that were behind them last year that maybe got a little bit better. So I have them ever so slightly missing on the playoffs. I would not be surprised if they were a playoff team last year, maybe past teams like Utah, Seattle, Minnesota in my predictions right now, but I currently have LA finishing with 92 points. That's 7 lower than last year, and I had them missing out of the playoffs by just 1 mere point. So I don't have LA being a whole bunch of margin out. It would not surprise me at all if they made the playoffs again, but I just think there's a couple of teams out there who might be a little bit more ahead than the Kings are. So at this point in time, I currently have the Kings at 92 points, the first runner up in the Western Conference, minus 7 points in last year, just missing out on the playoffs. So interesting note there. If you look at 3 race, I can see this team improve to get better and more competitive for next year. 1, they need more offense. They were an average team offensively last year. If their offense can take another step forward this year, can Byfield be a little bit better? Can Kopitar be a little bit better? Can some of their depth scorers be a little bit better? I think this team could be really lethal next year. So if they can get some more offense, I think this team could improve next year. 2, consistent goaltending. To start the season, Talbot was fantastic, but then afterwards he went on a very sour stretch, which led to Riddick being the starter for some time, and they were really flip-flopping goaltenders, so they need consistent goaltending. Can Kuemper provide that, or will they have to try and acquire someone in season? It'll be interesting to see, but this team needs consistent goaltending. And 3, these young guys need to take steps. As much as they still have some pretty good veterans, they are trending towards being a more younger team, so I think they need to have those younger guys take a little bit more steps. Byfield needs to take another step. I think Laferriere needs to take another step. If Thomas Turcotte or Clark make it, they need to take another step. Spence needs to take another step. So they need a lot of these younger guys to take steps forward next year. So in my opinion, 3 ways this team can improve is 1, more offense, 2, consistent goaltending, and 3, young guys take steps. So that's my opinion on the LA Kings. And lastly, going over to my rating for this team. Now, like I said, this team did some decent moves, nothing overly substantial. I mean, they added Foegele, Edmundson, also had Kuemper, Burrows, Jeannot. So they have some decent players. Caleb Jones is another one. So they had some pretty decent players on the forward group on the defensive end. On top of that, they move on from Pierre Dubois, who was being a very big headache for that team. Also move on from Grenstrom. Also move Arvidsson, Lizotte, Talbot, Roy. So they moved some decent players. Add Kuemper as well. So they did some decent things. I'm not sure if they're 100% a whole bunch better team than they were last year, but they're going to be a little more competitive in my opinion. So in my opinion, I'm giving them a C+ rating, just above average. Not an overly great offseason, but not overly bad one either. I think they just got a little bit average and got a slight bit better than they were last year. So in my opinion, after their offseason moves, I think a C+ rating is warranted for the LA Kings. So that's my opinion on the Kings. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all this down in the comment section below. What do you think about these two teams? Do you agree with my opinion that the Oilers and Kings both had pretty good seasons last year, even though the Kings ended in round 1 and the Oilers 1 win away from the Cup? Do you agree with my opinion that these two teams both had pretty good off seasons? And do you agree with my predictions for the LA Kings and for the Edmonton Oilers for 24-25 season. Definitely, if you guys thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. So I'm going to talk about for today. Until this video, if you're channel, subscribe down below. Thank you for your support. We're able to talk to you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget the subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment down in the comment section below so you can also discuss today's video. Also, a blog, to news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So check that out. Leave a link in the description below. And can't see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.